Good afternoon, Unit 6. Two hearings left. This one and one more, I think, and then that ends the session. I want to start by thanking your teacher and your coach for providing this experience to you. We don't often think about things in our lives that we'll remember forever, but I suggest to you that this will be one of those things that you'll remember this experience for the rest of your life, and your teacher and coach have helped provide you with a memory that will stay with you. My name is Tom Vance, and I'm a professor of education at Kansas State University. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Hey, everybody. My name is Sean Arthurs. I'm a teacher and a lawyer. I live just south of Washington, D.C. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I feel like since you're from Michigan, I need to ask like where on the hand is the perfect, perfect. We got different hands going on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thanks, y'all.
My name is Lawana Davis. I am a professor of law at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama.
And if you could introduce yourselves to us.
Of course. Thank you for allowing us to testify before you today. We are a unit composed of sophomores and juniors from East Grand Rapids High School. I'm Roshana Saidazamova.
I'm Kira Frang.
I'm Sydney Timmer. And I'm Sydney Muller, and we are coached by the lovely Adam Horos and Ben Langholtz. We are Unit 6.
Excellent. You are asked today to answer the following. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin.
President Washington warned overgrown military establishments under any form of government are conspicuous to liberty. Centuries later, President Eisenhower acknowledged that while military funding was necessary, it could lead to undesirable nation priorities. In modern times, Eisenhower's warning has come to fruition, as the direct and inordinate amounts of influence lobbyists wield, as well as the prioritizing of military funding over domestic needs, has caused a detrimental shift in the policymaking process.
The military-industrial complex refers to the relationship between policymakers, the economy, and the military. Eisenhower's warning has been ignored as government funding for military production by private companies has persistently expanded. For instance, in 1972, the government funded Lockheed Martin $190 million adjusted for inflation to produce the F-16 fighter jet, while in 2019, they funded the same corporation $1.7 trillion to produce the F-35 fighter jet. However, reducing funding for these corporations is politically dangerous as they employ almost 200,000 people.
Our framers recognized the danger in a standing army. James Madison referred to them as one of the greatest mischiefs that can possibly happen. However, they came to the conclusion that it was a necessary evil. As Hamilton outlined in Federalist 8, a federal standing army would prevent tension between state armed forces, and without the presence of a national military, many feared singular states would create strong and threatening militias. Regulation was provided through the Army Clause, located in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. In contemporary times, some of the founders' fears are relevant, while others, such as military coups, have not transpired. One such attempted coup took place 4 years prior to the Constitutional Convention, and another was rumored of in the 1930s, but neither led to violence. Today, the military is among the most trusted government institutions, with 60% of Americans having a great deal of trust. However, the framers fear that the military will be used for expansionary purposes is relevant. Today, the U.S. has over 160,000 troops deployed to 150 countries, meaning our military directly influences 75% of the world's nations.
Such a strong international military presence has its benefits. For example, in 2011, shortly after the Tohoku tsunami hit the coast of Japan, U.S. forces were deployed to aid citizens and military allies. Our bases also reassured our allies of our protective commitment. However, We must heed Eisenhower's warning that we will bankrupt ourselves in the vain search for absolute security. During the 1950s, the military budget was approximately $13 billion. Today, the budget for the military is upwards to $700 billion. The cost of the Iraq War alone ran north of $382 billion, which could be better invested to promote economic development in the United States.
Strengthening the economic influence rather than the military influence of the United States would more effectively promote American values and further its interests. Other nations have already adopted this approach. For example, China's Belt and Road Initiative commits 30% of its GDP to developing Asian infrastructure, while Japan has a similar plan. Implementing an improved initiative in the United States would ensure that developing countries can be politically independent, sustainable resources will be provided, and anti-corruption standards will be upheld. Allocating some military spending to such projects will strengthen the peaceful relationships between the United States and the rest of the world. Ultimately, we contend that Eisenhower was correct in his claim that the growth of the military-industrial complex will result in consequences greater than those anticipated by the founders. Thank you, and we are now ready for your questions.
So thank you, team. You mentioned the phrase, the military, one of the most trusted government institutions. I'd like to ask you specifically, about 12 miles from my house is the White House, and about last year, there were protesters who were cleared out from near the White House. The president then appeared for a photo op, and one of the military officers, the head general in the country, appeared in the photo with the president. Was that appropriate or not? Any thoughts on whether that should have happened or should not have happened?
That should not have happened, considering in this photo, when former President Trump was posing with the military officer, generally in our society, we respect the military so much because we are directly electing the president who speaks for the military on behalf of the people. So when they're posing in this specific way that was seemed harmful to a lot of people in the context that it was given, it would be a bad thing because it shows that the president may not be reflecting people's best interests in our country.
In addition, one of the founders' most prevalent fears was that our military would overpower our central government and work with the executive, especially with January 6th and this Capitol Hill riot. Some Americans feared of a military coup. Having a military work alongside, having our executive work alongside our military is important, but we must understand and we must heed the founders' warnings of a standing army.
My question to you then would be, when is it okay for a military officer to say no or to refuse to do what the commander-in-chief asks him or her to do? Is that ever appropriate? So is it ever appropriate for a military officer to say no to the commander-in-chief? And when might that be?
Although the president is outlined the commander-in-chief in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, military officers must obtain their morals and their values. And ultimately, if they see fit as doing this photo op with the president as a direct violation of their own morals, I would say that it would be appropriate for them to deny this request.
We obviously have several military bases and installations across the world. Given our modern times, how should we decide which of those overseas bases we should close or keep open? And what criteria should we use for that?
The United States has used the implementation of these AUMFs specifically on the war on terrorism. We have seen that the United States has implemented two forms of AUMFs to protect the nation's security against these terrorist groups. We've implemented 19 and used it 36 times, and we have seen how these uses of AUMFs have been overused, and we can see that the United States is staying in these countries like Afghanistan for not necessarily appropriate reasons, just to keep two different ethnic groups apart from one another.
Additionally, the United States originally entered Iraq to investigate if they were making nuclear weapons. However, it was founded that that they were not, and yet we still have not taken troops out of Iraq.
Additionally, one place we can see where it is good when we have troops is when our troops are acting as a deterrent. Currently in South Korea, where we have troops deployed, we are acting as a form of a deterrent to North Korea, as they still have divide within these two nations, specifically with the demilitarized zone. And so essentially acting as this deterrent is extremely helpful to them. And they also agree with us being there, as a Pew Research study conducted showed that 71% of South Korean citizens believe that the United States is a trustable ally. So being in these places where we're helping in forms of deterrence is extremely important, and we should continue being in places such as those.
Additionally, humanitarian efforts by the military should continue to be implemented. For example, in 1991, we aided in Operation Sea Angel, which was one of the biggest military humanitarian efforts in history. And the United States, along with countries such as the UK and Japan, saved over 1.7 million survivors of this devastating cyclone in Bangladesh.
So you've been talking, those are all great examples of like the authorized use of military as a deterrent or in providing aid, that kind of thing. Let's talk about when it's not authorized, and under what conditions, if any, does the executive, or should the executive have the authority to use military force? In other words, troops or missiles or whatever, inflicting injury on an enemy in some way. Under what circumstances is that justified without having congressional approval?
One instance we can see where a lot of people suggest that the United States should have gotten more involved in this particular instance is the Rwandan genocide. The United States, although we were involved a little bit with the United Nations going into this genocide, a lot of people argued that Rwandan citizens were being killed and their right to life was being endangered. And so a lot of people would argue that the United States military should have gotten more involved in that instance and saved more citizens.
In addition, we have seen that the executive has abused the power of the War Powers Act. Although the executive has to notify Congress in 48 hours that they are launching military troops to a foreign country, they have a 60-day free period where these troops stay on foreign soil, and there's a 30-day recall period if Congress chooses not to agree with this. But we have seen cases, specifically with Clinton v. Campbell, where the executive has abused this power. Clinton found loopholes through this War Powers Act to bring back and forth these troops between air and land.
So there's been some criticism of the military and how they've handled sexual assault cases, military judging their own. Do you think that do you think there's ever a time when people in the military should be judged not by the military, but by civilian judges? All the time, never, sometimes? Any thoughts on how we might address that?
I believe that the military should be judged with civilian judges. As you can see in a small island off the coast of Japan where we have a military base, it's only 0.6% of the population. However, there are over 4,700 cases of violence against US troops that are based within that island. And so I believe that these troops, although they are serving our country, they still should be held accountable for the violence that they are causing within Japan.
Agreeing with my colleague, a lot of the times when we have troops deployed in other countries, we are acting, or the majority of the time we are acting for the United States, but it's also extremely important to consider civilians' response to that, as when we are dealing with conflicts between different ethnic groups, this also involves civilians. So it's extremely important for their voices and understandings to be heard and see that we are actually making a good impact in these countries with situations. May I finish my statement?
Yes.
With situations such as these.
Thank you very much, Unit 6. Excellent job. Take a deep breath. You did it. You did a really excellent job. I want to just point out a couple things in terms of responding to my question. but even before my question, you had gone through a lot of different uses of military force, which I really appreciated. And then with my question, you really got down to some specific details about the War Powers Act that I really appreciated. But it still remains to kind of be thinking about, and if you could, I'm borrowing a comment from a fellow judge, if you can generalize an abstract from those specific examples, when is it justifiable for the executive to use force? You went through all of the kind of the machinery, which is great. That's one part of the of answering the question. But then if you could say, well, if we're attacked, directly attacked, if U.S. citizens' lives are at risk overseas, if there, and you did mention a terrible genocide going on, if the international organizations, which you did mention too, by the way, I'm giving you credit for everything you did do. Those are all way. So, and being able to go back and forth from like specific to general and general to specific, deductive and inductive, right? If I'm remembering my ed psych classes the right way, that's a really important skill. And so, in addition to learning great stuff about our government and system of governance, you're also demonstrating outstanding critical thinking. I thought it was very, very well done.
Thank you very much, team. I appreciated it. I just build on my colleagues' comments. I particularly enjoyed, the Rwanda incident. I thought was first time today we've heard that and talk about when U.S. should have intervened. One particular sort of persuasive argument strategy that I thought you began to employ and could maybe even exploit a little bit more was your use of statistics. Or numbers, right? I mean, I know you used it to show, for example, the amount going to trillions of dollars to Lockheed Martin, and then you were talking about 200,000 employees, the number of troops, and 75% of the countries. I thought that was well done, and you could perhaps even take it even further and say this statistic shows the reach of the, like, take it even, so you brought the statistics, and sometimes they speak for themselves a little bit, but sometimes for your audience, just, you've got the statistics, you've got the evidence. Tell the audience what you want that evidence or what that evidence means. Just kind of pushing you a little bit further on what was a good start on y'all's part. So thank you, and good luck with your with the last one coming up.
Same. I agree with my colleagues, and excellent presentation, and good luck going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.